Okay, folks, welcome back to video lecture part 2 of managing teams. So far in part 1, you have seen the advantages and disadvantages of teams. That was one of two topics covered within that video lecture. And the second part was, of course, the different types of teams that we looked at: project, virtual, and so on. And now I'm going to bring you to the next two sections of the video on managing teams. And this is looking at the general characteristics of how teams work and understanding how they work, and also explain how to enhance teamwork effectiveness, and which incorporates the element of compensation. So on that, we'll just drop down to our presentation. And here we are, and bring out our PowerPoint slides. And let us just enlarge these so as we can see what we're reading. So as I said, the next two sections are the understand the general characteristics of teams and of work teams themselves, or teams in general, and then enhance the team effectiveness, how we can do that. So this is broken down into a number of characteristics. First, we have the team norms, the cohesiveness of the team, the size, conflict, and then team development. So if we look at these characteristics, so team norms, what essentially this means? So informally agreed upon standards that regulate the team behavior. And that evolves over time. So if you're a team that comes together for the first time and none of you know each other, you'll spend some time trying to familiarize them. Well, who is he? What's his purpose? What's his background? And who is she? And where do they come from? And how long have they been with the organization? So we begin to get a feel for each other. Okay. And then we look at the powerful influence on work behavior. And once we get to understand each other and the team starts to work together, and beginning to achieve some levels of success and addressing issues and managing issues within the team itself, we begin to see structures form. We begin to see behaviors form. And then, as I say, these regulate everyday behaviors of the teams themselves. So these become our own internal unwritten rules for all intents and purposes. For example, it might be a case that, let's just say, one of the team members has issues with babysitters or baby minders and child minders or whatever, which is often the case nowadays. The team might say, well, okay, Mark, you don't need to be here until 9 o'clock in the morning when the schools have actually started, so you don't have to drop off your children at 8 o'clock to the childminder, who would then bring them to school or collect them at 4 o'clock or 3 o'clock. Maybe you can go at that time, and so on, until you get a more acceptable solution for yourself, that someone minds the children in the morning and the evening, whatever the case may be. So the team will facilitate that. But they're carrying your load for you in those times that you're not available. But two things happen out of that. It becomes almost unwritten that you'd be expected to step up to the plate, so to speak, put in extra effort while you're there. And maybe down the road, you might be asked to say, Mark, we need you to work this weekend. And the last thing you're going to do is say, oh, I have the kids' soccer match, and I have the kids' Gaelic match, and I have the children's ballet dances and music lessons. That won't go down too well. So you would have to be able to sacrifice your weekend to come in, to commit to the team. These are extreme examples, but nevertheless, it gives you an indication of the expected norms and behaviors. So the cohesiveness of the team, the extent to which the members are attracted to the team itself and motivated to remain in the team, that comes down to the motivation. And the cohesive teams, they retain their members, promote cooperation, high levels of performance. So the team is successful in many respects. People enjoy working. They're highly motivated to want to work in the team. They're learning stuff. And that's often one of the biggest issues or characteristics or attributes, positive attributes of team working, is you're learning from others. You're learning from not necessarily what they know in a particular area of expertise, but maybe the way there's that person looks at a problem or sees a solution. You might pick up on the way they do that. So you're learning not only stuff, knowledge, but you're learning how the process of how to develop that and how you could change your behaviors or modify some of your behaviors to be as efficient, if not more efficient, than somebody else. So it brings in that kind of, it's almost like a healthy competition within each of the individuals within the team, and the team looks after each other, and protects the team. So all members protect the team, in all sorts of situations. And that's what makes a team cohesive. They function very well. There's a lot of positivity. That doesn't mean that you will have conflict from time to time. Of course you will. Not everyone will agree on all the solutions. But because the team has succeeded previously, they came up with an idea and a solution for it, worked, and this time around now they're challenged and they have a different problem to try and resolve, and the team might be divided and this, that, and the other, and then we might look back as a team and say, well, this is how we did it previously, let's go with it that way. And then the conflict might subside and everyone said, right, okay, it worked in that occasion, we'll try it again and move on and do it this way. Or we'll say, no, it won't suit this situation, we need to come up with an alternative solution. And some parts of the members of the team might say, well, it worked before, why not do it the same way? And someone else might say, well, it doesn't, the dynamics of the new challenge or the new product or the new situation are different from the other one, and we have a great chance to learn something new or develop some new skills with new technology and so on and so forth. And so those that wanted to go with the old idea and the old way of solving the problem are now won over to a new way of doing it. So you'll have those kind of conflicts, which are healthy, and that's the important point about it. So how do we go about promoting team cohesion? So make sure all the team members are present at team meetings. So everyone contributes, everyone learns, everyone sees, everyone is involved. That's the important thing about it, because there's nothing worse than having a team meeting where somebody is missing and they have key knowledge. They might be the expert for a particular area. Then the meeting becomes pointless almost, and frustrations build up. So everyone being present, create additional opportunities for teammates to work together. So, looking at the various tasks that the team and pairing off people, maybe, for example, or arranging that someone that's very experienced might mentor somebody that's less experienced and say, Mark, will you take on that apprentice electrician and on that particular site and get this job done, and so on. So we subdivide some of the work and then we all come back together again and swap around and create again. It's not purposefully creating competition, but oftentimes you find that it becomes part of the fun, where you and me, my apprentice, let's work out, let's try and beat the other team and have a bit of a laugh, and then maybe over a social point to say, oh yeah, we did this better than we did this, done and that, and we give you that one, yeah, you did that better than us, and so on and so on. That kind of stuff works, and it works very effectively because you have great dynamics in the team, cohesiveness. So engage in non-work activities, as I just mentioned, whether it's taking, blowing off steam at the weekend, going for a few pints maybe on a Friday evening after work, or whether it's, playing soccer, going bowling, taking a weekend activity, whatever it is, some place where you begin to socialize a little bit more. Now, that doesn't suit everybody. Some people like their own time away from it. That's fine. But you might find that it could be just an afternoon. It could be organized within the team itself during working hours. Let's take time out and do some team building exercises. Any excuse to not have to do exactly what we're doing all day, every day, and just do something different. And companies do that quite a lot within their organizations, facilitating this kind of team building exercises. Now, I don't want to overemphasize that these are the panacea team building exercises. They're not. Look at them as opportunities for people to come together in a kind of a social environment, non-work focused, to take some of the pressure off work and say, now we're together, and during working hours to do something different. As I said, it could even be going off to, what's it, paintballing, for example, or snowboarding, where depending on where you are. And then make employees feel that they are part of a special organization. So there's nothing more satisfying than being on a winning team. And that's essentially what it is. Now, we can't always be on the winning team. There always has to be a losing team in a competition. But generally speaking, in a work environment, we create our own rules, our own regulations, our own norms for working, and we succeed. And we communicate that success. We're constantly putting out our progress reports, our status reports, and saying, this is where we are, this is where we are. And people recognize, geez, that's a really good team over there. That group of guys and ladies over there, they're really getting things done, and so on and so forth. What are they doing? How are they doing this so effectively? And that's really important. I mean, this is certainly one of the areas of my doctoral studies, in terms of functioning teams and how we pass around, disseminate information and knowledge as to what works and what doesn't work. And this is what happens outside groups, teams looking in, will see how that team is functioning so well. And could even be on a leaderboard. You could see, they're achieving their objectives, boom, 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 boom. And let's find out, what are they doing? And that's like in the bigger picture, in the macro environment, where companies are saying, oh, that company is succeeding extremely well. They're doing great sales. They're making new products. They're constantly trying. How are they doing it? Let's find out. And it's the same with other teams. And where you have the self-designing teams are at that level of maturity, highly functional, high-performance teams, they share this information because they like to say, well, we don't want to be at the top of the scale all the time. We like to have a little bit of competition, healthy competition. So let's show other people to see, how we do it, and maybe we can have two teams then competing for the next batch of projects. But it's done in a positive manner. I'll come back to other points shortly. So if we look at what really works, team cohesion and team performance. So team performance is 66% of it. Team performance and interdependent tasks, 73%. And if we look at team performance with independent tasks, it's 60%. So when you have independent tasks within the team, so the team, when it's working together with interdependent tasks, and the important point of this is, take for example, you could have a department of software engineers and they're working on different projects. Let's just say you have 21 software engineers, coders, working on 7 different projects. And let's assume there are 3 people per project, okay? Just for simplicity. Does that mean that the department of software engineers is a team? No. The three people working on project A, that's a team. The 3 people working on project E, that's a team, and so on, because there's no interdependence. They're working on independent tasks, and that's why it falls down. They might chat informally afterwards. Look, we work on this project. We have this problem. Can you advise us? Did you come across a similar problem? It might be a coffee talk and so on and so forth, and they find out and so on and so forth. But they're not working together side by side, solving problems, making decisions. There are 7 independent projects, 3 members on each. They might swap through the informal organization some of their successes and failures. But where you have interdependent tasks, that's within that group of 3, they're working exceptionally well. But if let's just say if you had 4 of those projects software projects were working for the one product, and there are 4 separate programs that have been written, then the teams might come together every couple of weeks to discuss, this is what we're doing, this is how our solution, this will affect your solution, and you need to code it this way and you need to code it that way, and so on. Now you have these interdependent, so now you have this team performance hitting the 70s and 80s% in terms of performance with cohesiveness, because we're communicating to enable us to achieve the overall objective. So 4 teams with 3 people on each team developing one product, but 4 separate pieces of software that needs to be, or 4 individual parts that are work together to deliver a product. Then you have interdependency. But bear that in mind. So, and again, performance, as you see here, as the team gets bigger, then you have a size of performance up along the side. There is an optimal size of a team, and this is it here. Okay, and you say, well, what is that? The debate goes on. Generally speaking, optimal team sizes for performance usually falls between 8 and 12 people per team. And the more complex the challenge, the project, the product, the service, the more complex that is, the teams tend to be on the smaller side, on the lower side, 7, 8 people on the teams. Why? Because they have so many diverse backgrounds. And for a team leader to be able to lead so many diverse backgrounds, the number of relationships becomes increasingly complex. So if you have 30 people on a team with very different backgrounds, God help the poor team leader, because he has so many different types of relationships and different perspectives to understand. It doesn't work. And that's where you get this diminishing returns. So in larger teams, the performance begins to drop off, essentially. So in around there. Now, if you had, we said 30 people, and they're all doing almost identical tasks, working on a production line and so on and so forth, then a manager can manage 30 people or 50 people or 60 people, because the relationships are very similar. But generally speaking, in our current technological type environments and products and services, these are very complex. Therefore, team sizes tend to be on the lower side to be far more effective and specialized. Okay. So team conflict, well, okay, I've covered this in conversations, but you have cognitive conflicts, focuses on problems and issues and associated with improvements in team performance. That's the C-type conflict. And the A-type conflict, affective conflict, emotional, personal disagreements, and associated with these are associated with decreases in team performance. So the A-type are more on the personality side, whereas the C-type are on the issue, the product itself or the service itself, and so on. So not having the right inputs, for example, in C-type, or not clearly understanding what the requirements are, what the issues are, therefore coming up with ineffective solutions and so on. That can be frustrating, and you can have conflicts in those areas. Why? Because you don't have enough detail. You weren't given all the information. You weren't given all the data, for example, and that can cause frustrations and affecting the team performance. But the other side, and I generically say this, the A-type conflict, are the politics within teams, the personalities within teams, and they have a huge role to play. And that's why in later on, when and in the previous videos that I talked about in leadership, it's very, very important to have the right leadership within a team. It's not a privileged position. Now, I will be covering this in follow-up sequence of these videos around team roles, to go into more depth in these areas. But suffice it to say that fundamentally, politics, personalities, and emotions, person's tempers, right? People feel they're not being listened to, or people are being overwhelming, people are shouting, and so on. All of these things can affect. And now you're saying, well, you can't be doing that in this day and age. You can't be shouting at people. Look, crap happens. People lose their tempers. Why? Because they're not being listened to, or because people are not seeing their perspective and not taking in the information to help. Because no one is purposefully going out to cause an argument within a team. Well, generally speaking, they're not anyway. So the point about it is, it can be healthy. Don't get me wrong, it can be healthy. So both types often occur simultaneously. So, and often you find that in the case of C, for example, where you don't have all the details and so on, frustration kicks in. Some people see the frustration sooner than others, and that's what gives rise to personalities, issues, and emotions start to run high. And sometimes when emotions then begin to run high, people become defocused on what has to be done, and so it gets into this downward spiral of underperformance, and gets worse and worse, and nothing gets achieved at all in the worst case scenario. So if we look at this, so how teams can have a good fight, so to speak. So work with more rather than less information. Get as much information, gather the data, gather all the facts, Get all the inputs so as we have all the cards on the table, so to speak. Develop multiple alternatives to enrich debate. So numbers of solutions come up. Think about this, think about that. So remember, use your design thinking methodology as individuals and as a group to come up with a number of solutions. Then start to cut back on the least effective, both from time, quality, cost, all of those. Let's see what are the ones that are actionable, that we have most consensus on. And then establish common goals. So we look forward to as a group saying, well, these are the ones that are important. These are the prioritization. We're all more or less in agreement with these solutions. Inject humor into the workplace. Absolutely, I will take it to my grave, but humor is an absolute necessity in organizations, in groups. Now, that don't mean that you need to have a joker. It may help, but generally speaking, you do have to have a sense of humor in the right measures, in the right circumstances, and so on. So having a bit of crack, and I don't mean, oh my God, I was shot for saying things like that, but having a bit of fun. So you need to inject a bit of humor. So, and usually you'll have some witty character or person or a couple of them in the team that can lighten up the mood, particularly in the B-type conflict or the A-type conflict from previously on. Excuse me. So having someone that can, calm things down a little bit by injecting a little bit of humor. Okay, witticisms. I'm the greatest supporter of that point, to say the least. So maintain a balance of power. So making sure, as for example, as a team leader, taking responsibility on that role, that everyone has their say, that it isn't just weighted towards the more experienced people, that everyone, least experienced people, and that takes skill to be able to identify and watch for signals and see if somebody wants to interject and say something. But they're relatively new, and you might invite them to be able to say something, and creating the environment that they're not laughed at, obviously, and that what they have to say can contribute, may be very valuable, it may be insignificant, but in any case, showing respect for the person's opinion and getting them to make an opinion, that's a very important skill for a team leader, or indeed the more experienced people in the team who would assume some leadership type role. Then maintain as a balance of power, and then resolve issues without forcing a consensus. Okay, so not that when we say without forcing, so it emerges that we're all in agreement, or most of us are in agreement, but don't say, right, we've spent enough time on this, now let's take a vote. How many in favor? Yes. And how many? That doesn't work, because you're still omitting or cutting off healthy debate. There might be some other issues, other things to discuss that might become more relevant or more important as we begin to emerge or develop more and more solutions with more insights and collective thinking. Okay, so watch that one. So I'm not going to go through on this, but what triggers the conflict in this scene? We're looking at the Apollo 13, and you can watch the movie yourself. But I do. Does the mission commander Jim Lovell successfully manage the group dynamics to return the group to a normal state? In this, generally speaking, yes. And if you watch the movie with Tom Hanks, it's actually one of my favorite movies. And one of the reasons is the role of Jim Lovell, Tom Hanks in this case, the kind of calming effect he had. He wasn't overly excitable. How he thought of solutions, how he distracted people from the criticality of the state of the running out of oxygen, for example, and the fire, and trying to take control of the spacecraft and trying to get the trajectory right, and the trust that they had in him to get that done. And there was another part in the movie where they needed to scrub the carbon monoxide that was building up in the Apollo 13 capsule. And there was a scene where the engineers back in NASA were thrown all these bits of equipment and told, problem, we need to scrub the carbon monoxide out of the capsule or they'll die. Find a way And this is all the equipment they have. These are all the bits and pieces, duct tape, boxes, this kind of a thing, and that bits and pieces. Come up with a solution, and they all put their heads together. Time was against them. They had to come up with a solution extremely quickly. The project manager made it very clear: get this solved, or these three guys die. There's three, yeah. And I remember again when they were coming down and they came up with a solution. They walking down, the bits falling on the ground, and they came up with a solution, and then they relayed precisely the sequence. And then, of course, when they needed to save power on rebooting the computer and so on, meticulously going through the sequence in a simulated environment back on Earth to cut back on the wattage, the voltage actually, keep the voltage down so as it doesn't overrun the battery, and they wouldn't have their communications for guidance at re-entry. So that movie is full of knowledge and learnings, to use that word, that always attracts me, and I've watched it so many times, and I just enjoy the way they went about solving problems, the teamwork, the project elements within that movie. So much, it's packed with so much knowledge. You would be doing yourselves a favor to look at it and look at it from those perspectives. How did they do this? Why was the team functioning this? Understanding the effectiveness. Now, I mentioned to you before, you have Kurt Lewin's model of forming, storming, norming, performing, and then deforming, destorming, and denorming, destorming, and deforming. It's a generic. It's a way we come together. We come together as a group. We bounce around ideas, then we become used to the way we're doing things. We start to get the norms, and once we've all of that stuff done, we start to perform. Now, the other three are kind of add-ons, because really, once a team has achieved its objectives and its performances has released a product or released a service to customers and so on and so forth, they've already gone into the deforming structure. Some people have been released from the project and moved on to other projects or onto other teams, or they've swapped around into some support mechanism through the close down of the project, and so on and so on. So we don't specifically go down. There's a kind of a natural evolution onto the next phase or the next project and so on. So oftentimes we try to keep the same teams together if a project warrants it. But generally speaking, we need to be able to adapt to change and work with new people for each project and so on. That's really the point here. But there are stages, because we all go, this could take a matter of, for example, forming, and that could happen in a day. It could happen in a couple of hours when you all come together and get the feel and structure of each other. I remember when I first met up with my colleagues, fellow students on my MBA down in Limerick for a study weekend, and we literally, it was phenomenal just to watch around and look at people sizing each other up, and where do you work, and what's your background, this, that, and the other thing, and then by the end of the weekend, we started to form our personalities, started to form these study groups, and you had one group from Boston Scientific only, and then there was a couple of other companies, and they tended to stick together, and then there was a few more of us, about 5 of us, that weren't, we were all from different backgrounds, but we formed a study group, and by Jesus, we had some cracking backgrounds and experiences and so on, and I have to say it was very enjoyable doing an MBA under those kind of circumstances, and the support and mechanisms that we put in place for each other. But we have that, and it can take a little bit longer. It could take, if it might be a rugby team that comes together, the national team, and you have different players coming on, different squads coming on. You're trying to get, and you try and get to understand, inside the training camps and so on, and testing out new things, and then you go out and you perform or not, depending on which rugby team you're talking about. So enhancing work team effectiveness. So we need to have setting clear goals, understand what needs to be done, and coming up with the priorities of how we do what we're going to do. Identifying the key team members, or all team members, as the case may be, in terms of their backgrounds and that, and the varying levels of contributions each team member can make, whether it's, HR side of things, finance, operations, IT, product, R&D department. Each will have a set of skills and expertise that can contribute. Team training, pulling us all together, working through these are the generics of how a team should operate. So let us make sure that we understand how we work together as a team, the rules and processes that we want to put in place, and get that in place as quickly as possible. And then, of course, the key point on here, the team compensation. How do we recognize team's performance and so on? So setting the goals and priorities, so team goals enhance team performance. So when we know what's expected from us, we get on and do it, and we do it more efficiently and effectively because we have clearly communicated goals. So goals clarifying the team priorities, so we know what has to be done by when. And then challenging team goals help team members to regulate effort. So knowing the complexity or the challenges, the levels of what's expected of us, then we can pace ourselves in delivering on each of those goals. Sometimes we might work a little bit harder to get things done earlier. Say, for example, if you were taking a team of electricians and apprentices and so on, they might say, well, let's as I say, let's get the finger out here on Thursday morning, and we'll get these houses wired out by as much as possible by this evening. That means we only have this much to do Friday, and we can all knock off at 2 o'clock and have an extra few hours for the weekend, for example. So we can pace ourselves. Or we might just say we'll work hard Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and take Thursday off, and come back then Friday, discuss what needs to be done for the following week. All of these kind of things can kick into place, but essentially we become our own, we take on responsibility for our own work. The important thing is that the team leader has confidence in the team, knowing that they will deliver, probably ahead of schedule, but nevertheless doesn't force that to try and save time and money for the company, because the team dynamics wouldn't appreciate that. If someone started, well, you did it in 4.5 days last week, can't you not do it next week, and so on, might not suit the team. Okay, so having that level of flexibility and understanding. So challenging team goals help members to regulate their effort. And then requirements for stretch goals to motivate team performance. So teams have high degree of autonomy, teams are empowered with control resources, and teams need for structural accommodation, and teams need for bureaucratic immunity. So stop bugging us with all the day-to-day stuff and let us off and do our job. Stop coming in and checking on us every 2 hours or every day or every week and so on. That, get away from, and someone else to, well, we don't want to be writing reports about this, that, and the other. Can you get somebody else to help write the reports, or get a project administrator who can collate all the information and present it, and we'll verify, yeah, everything is done, and so on. Let us focus on what we're good at, our core competencies. Outsourcing this other stuff, that's kind of like the bureaucratic immunity. Don't get involved in distracting things that are not core to, or not critical to, achieving the particular goals of the team itself. And empowered with control resources, so they can control and manage themselves. Teams have a high degree of self-autonomy, so that to a large extent they are trusted to deliver on the goals. How they do it is totally within the remit or the boundaries of the team itself, and based on past performances, these teams have always delivered. Therefore, we can let them off. We don't need as much oversight. It's like you teaching a kid to walk. You're standing there with your hands behind them. When they're able to walk several steps, you might stand back and further back. Eventually, the kid is walking, and you're standing at the other end of the room for the kid walking to you and say, "There's your goals." That's analogous to precisely what happens with teams in terms of their independence in this case, to be able to do what they've been brought together to do in the first instance. So selecting people for the team. So we have the individualism, collectivism, the team level, and of course team diversity. Now, sorry, I need to stick with no. So we have groups of individuals, we have personalities, but we also need to work as a collective. So we know that we have different attributes. Sometimes what I might have to contribute might not be as important as some of the technical issues, but nevertheless, I'm part of the solution. I'm part of the team to provide a solution. And the team level in terms of, whether it is forming, or in this case, performing, norming and storming and performing. Are we at that level now? We're at performance, so we're familiar with each other. We know our colleagues' likes, dislikes. We know how they behave under pressure, and we know how they why what makes them tick. In other words, what motivates them, and how we can take pressure off someone so as they can take pressure off you, and so on. So we're at that highly advanced level of performance. That's the team level we're trying to achieve. If you're to put it on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's the self-actualization. The team is come together, it's doing well, it's winning games, it's achieving goals, and so on. And team diversity, having again the different backgrounds. The diversity of the team means having multiple perspectives in terms of solution generation. That's team diversity, seeing things from so many different viewpoints, perspectives. So team trainings, we look at team training for leaders, technical training, conflict, decision making and problem solving, and then interpersonal skills. Now, I've talked about all of these points and during the course of these two lectures, so I don't need to go into them in any more detail. But interpersonal skills, that's why we use those psychometric tests with you to identify who you are and your skill set, your followership, your leadership, and so on. And then managing conflict, and I talked about conflict, is sometimes it can be healthy, and again, training from team leaders themselves. Now, of course, we're not training the team leaders in this area because, as I said, it's not a privileged position, but it's only another role. I'll be discussing these in a later video lecture on Belbin's team roles and leadership, and team leadership comes up, but you've already have had a presentation on leadership which covers these areas. So problems reported by team leaders themselves, confusion about new roles, feeling they've lost control, not knowing what it means to coach or empower, having doubts about whether team concepts will work, uncertainty about dealing with employees' doubts, confusion about when team is ready for more responsibility, confusion about how to share, and so on, so on. So we're looking, these are all the 10 issues identified by team leaders themselves. And knowing where, not knowing where to turn for help with team problems and so on. The first place to turn to is within the team itself, recognizing that there are problems within the team, how it's functioning, or whatever the case may be. Maybe somebody has decided to leave the company and needs to have a replacement inside there. How efficiently or not that person can be now subsumed into the team to maintain, because it may need to be explained to them, okay, your performance levels might drop back temporarily while we customize this new person to the team norms and performances, and then come back up again. That's the expectation. So that little lull can frustrate people, but as a team leader, how to manage that and so on. So these are, there are real issues. They can be real issues for team leaders too. But I would not say that, again, they're not the manager of the team. They're the team leader. They identify, and by identifying these things and working within the team, we can solve many of these issues themselves. Having doubts as to whether the team concept will work and so on. That can be evaluated through the team and team performance and achieving goals and knowing what the goals are in the first instance, how quickly or not we're achieving these goals. So we can validate whether the team is working or efficiently or not. So the team compensation and recognition, the final parts of these slides. So we have the level of reward must match the level of performance. Absolutely. So the 3 methods of compensating team participants are skill-based pay, gain sharing, and non-financial rewards. So let's have a look at these. So if we look at these, for example, I'm going to put on my glasses so I can actually read these as well. But if we look at here, merit-based team pay. So adjustments within the team for difference of individuals. So essentially, what we're looking at here is the team earns a bonus or recognition. So let's go back up to the very start. Plant-wide profit sharing based on overall company or division performance, but with equal payouts for all team members and such. Probably the most effective way of doing things. So if you have your organizational goals, your strategic goals broken down into your organization, broken down into your project goals, and within the for each team or team working on each project, they have a clear connectivity to the overarching or hierarchical goals. And then we know that a profit can be attributed based on that. And one of the simplest ways we used in this was, say, for example, very senior managers in an organization, maybe 20% of their pay is determined by their performance. The other 80% is determined by the performance of the company. But if you were working at the lowest level inside the organization, 80% of your pay and your bonus is determined by your performance, and the other 20% is determined by the performance of the team, the department, and the organization itself. So it's a good way of getting a more equitable distribution of performances and revenues and such. Gain sharing, as over here, and payouts to teams depending on how much each has saved the company. So the contributions, efficiencies, and so on. That's one way of looking at it. So gain sharing down here, equal payouts for all team members and members. In most, in the context of your teams, that's exactly what we're applying to your teams. So whatever mark one person gets, all persons get on that same team, because we mark the outputs of the team. We don't mark individuals. We don't need to and don't want to. And there's no requirement. If we were doing that, we would be giving you individual assignments. But we, so things go right, some things don't go so right. It's how you manage and function as a team. That's the group award or reward in your cases. So merit-based teams, so equal shares within the teams itself. So based on performance. So fundamentally, you would really have a mix of several of 2 or 3 of these types of recognition systems. It may not necessarily always be pay related. It could be time off. It could be additional programs, educational programs, or whatever, contribution for the members, individual members within the team itself. It can take many different forms of recognition, but in any case, the team performs, the rewards come. It takes a team to win out on a rugby pitch or on a soccer pitch, or indeed in a cycle race. It takes a team. One person might win on the sprint, or one person might win on general classification up the hill. Doesn't do it on his own. It's a team effort. They all benefit at various levels. And indeed, for example, a sprinter might be on a big bonus, or might win the reward money. They actually distribute amongst all the team members. They don't take it themselves, including the background staff, not just the actual cyclists themselves. So that's how you recognize and the team functions. So everybody wins. Everyone gets something out of it. So that's it, folks. That's the end of the slides on managing teams. Just let me go back to my usual area. So there are the 2 lectures covering those 4 topics within managing teams. Have a look at these. They're both of them. As I said at the start of the first video, it's most important that you look at the notes in the slide decks themselves. They're all available on Moodle, and you will get deeper explanations in some instances and additional information. And have a look at those, and we'll look into in the next sequence of team roles and how we assume or take on various roles within the teams. Okay, folks, we'll leave it at that. Talk to you next time. Cheerio. Bye bye.